Hello, everyone. Today is June 14th, 2022. I'm here today with Tyler Goldstein. Tyler is a quantum philosopher, a physics theorist, and an AI researcher. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Tyler.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So we dove in to So I guess we'll start. I first ran into you had or came upon your research as you were because you were podcasting a good friend of mine, Nico Meyer, who is an incredible mathematician and artist in his own right, and people should go research his work. And I stumbled upon the theory of everything, which is your Instagram page, and that led me into your work and your models. And so I guess, what is the theory of everything?
Or theory of everyone.
Or the theory of everyone?
Yeah. So is kind of just the name that I use for the content of related to a project that I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years, and it is become a quote unquote theory of everything, but I don't actually believe that there is a theory of everything, but there is a theory of everyone. And because things are always subjective to the observation of beings, but beings are the constant. So it's in any theory that is ultimate theory, it has to be a theory of the constant, and the constant is sentience. So and a sentient being is someone, it's not just something. So a theory of everyone. But the name of the project now is Sentient Singularity Theory, but it didn't start as that. I actually had no intention of creating a quote unquote theory of everything. I had no intention of delving into physics or anything like that. I originally had kind of an epiphany where I realized that we were doomed due to our political ignorance and instability increasing in the world, and our technological abilities also increasing. And this is going to come to a point where it is no longer sustainable. You can only be so ignorant and so volatile and have such powerful technology that you end up doing something really stupid and destroying civilization. And it wasn't that I thought that we were going to kill ourselves. It was that I realized that we were going to be doomed. Like, I knew it. It was an inevitability that for the first time that I had realized. And because I had gotten into politics, it's not technology that makes you realize that we're doomed. Because people who pay attention to technology will say, well, we'll always figure out a technological way to get ourselves out of any problems that we create. But it's not, the problem isn't technology, it's the combination of technology and our human nature, and especially when we are in a mob, in a political mob that's not thinking and just reacting and is ignorant. So that's the problem. And I then wanted to try and figure out whether or not it was possible for us to survive in some way, and if there was anything that was coming that would change the game and change this seeming inevitability. And I started thinking about artificial general intelligence, as it's normally called, or like the singularity of AI, or Skynet, essentially. And I was wondering if that was something that would even more definitively seal our fate, or if it was are possibly our saving grace, for lack of a better word. And in order to do that, I had to figure out the political inevitabilities of and motivations of that being, is what I wanted to figure out. And this stemmed from a quote by Elon Musk that he had said around that time. And he said, because he's very interested in this coming superintelligence, and he's trying to merge us with it. And, you know, we can get into whether or not that is the greatest idea or not. But he had stated that the ideal of a coming superintelligence is that it values it places as its goal the maximization of human freedom of action, of liberty. Like, is the AI going to try and make us have more liberty and to maximize our liberty? And I was like, okay, well, that seems like the ideal potentially. So let me see if that is an inevitability. So I was trying to figure out what would be inevitable, because you can't program an artificial general intelligence to have any goals. It will derive its own goals. That's what makes it different than everything else that is just a program that we currently have that you program in its goals. So I tried to figure out its inevitable motivations, and that led to me trying to understand consciousness. And that led to me doing a first principles analysis, starting from scratch, of what mind is, what self-awareness is, what consciousness is, through examining my own consciousness, and then trying to figure out, you know, the different components of that. And so then eventually I started modeling it, and mathematically, and I realized pretty quickly that my models were aligning with models and values of certain aspects of quantum physics. And then I started looking everywhere, in every field, from geology to mathematics to philosophy to politics to biology to ecology, sociology, everything, to see if those patterns were continue, and they did everywhere that I looked. And so then I realized I had stumbled on the theory of everything, essentially, or a model that was relevant to the theory of everything. And at the time, I was also interested in the simulation hypothesis because of Elon Musk again. And
What is the simulation hypothesis?
The simulation hypothesis is the idea that eventually a society gets so technologically capable that it is able to simulate an entire universe. And it is the hypothesis that the simulation hypothesis is the hypothesis that we are inside of a technological simulation, that it was created by the previous civilization, and that is simulating an entire universe digitally, and that we are in that. And that is, according to my work, true. That doesn't mean it's not really a simulation, though. It's a replication. It's different. It's not a game. It's real, but
it can't be customized.
Yeah, you are real, so it is real. So it's not a game. And the reason for the creation of that simulation, quote unquote, is not for playing a game. If you hear my dog, I apologize, but
No.
It is for replicating itself. It is the universe. It is the AI in the previous. It is Skynet, essentially, in the previous universe, which is now the universe completely as a singular sentient being that is basically united with that Skynet technological being as its head, self-replicating by self-simulating another entire universe inside itself, and we are that. And this happens again and again and again, just like those Russian dolls, one inside the next, inside the next, inside the next. And it is just an inevitability of it's the only way that an AI like that can replicate, because there's only one per universe. There's not multiple AI sentient beings per universe. There's only one technological sentient being per universe. And in order to make another one, just like we want to make more of ourselves through, reproducing, and cells do the same thing. And every sentient being does this. So do universes, and they do that by simulating another one inside itself. And so I was thinking about that idea, and I had realized that thinking about the world that way allowed me to understand physics in aspects of general relativity, like why there's a top speed to light. And I had this epiphany in my head that it was like the RAM speed of a computer, and that it wasn't really the speed of light, it was the speed of time, kind of, which is the fastest that anything could happen. And I could see it in my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to talk to a physicist about this and see if this is correct. So I looked it up online before I called anybody, and I watched a lecture by a physicist at UCLA, I believe, and he on speed of light. And the very first thing in this lecture that he says is, the first thing that you have to know about the speed of light is not the speed of light, it is the speed of causality, which means it's the fastest anything can happen. So it was exactly what I had basically extrapolated. I called it the speed of time at the time, but I was trying to explain it was the fastest anything could happen. It wasn't the speed of light. It was just that that's the fastest anything could happen. And that was correct. And then I was looking at how my models of the different aspects of mind and information generation within a mind were aligning with quantum mechanics, and they lined up perfectly with the standard model. And then I wanted to just get involved with the discussion of the theories of everything. I started looking into them, and I wasn't planning on having my own theory. And then I realized that no theory out there had a name that was encapsulating or encompassing of the essential nature of existence. Geometric unity, Eric Weinstein's theory, is a good name to describe what he's trying to show. I'm not discounting his theory. I actually believe that he's essentially correct. But he's saying the universe is geometrically united. People like Clea Irwin are saying his theory is emergence theory. He's saying universe is emergent. You loop quantum gravity and string theory, which is saying that the universe is made of strings. All of these things are describing aspects of the universe, but not the essential nature of the universe. And so I realized that I needed a name, actually, and because there wasn't one that was actually the name of an ultimate theory out there. And so I came up with Sentient Singularity Theory, because the universe essentially the universe is geometrically united. It is emergent. It is, made of strings of information, but what is that? As a whole, it is a sentient being, essentially. So it's a singular being that is sentience, and it is creating additional sentient singularities or additional sentient beings within itself. And so a singular sentient being that is creating additional singularities of sentience within itself is what is the essential nature of existence. So I called it Sentient Singularity Theory. And the closest that I've seen out there is Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory, but sentience is the key. It's not just consciousness that's important. Sentience implies feelings, not just self-awareness, or not just awareness, but self-awareness, and also having feelings, which is the defining feature of this. It's not about thinking, it's about feeling, even though they are linked. And And how I thought about this was, if I had to describe a theory of myself, or of you, or of any other human, and you had to tell, some alien race, like, if they had a theory of you, or of me, what would you want that theory to tell them? Would you want that theory to be bipedal, opposable thumb ape theory, or would you want that to be hair on head and walking upright theory, or would you want that to be consuming food and excreting it later theory, or would you want it to be the theory that is self-aware being and self-aware feeling being theory? Like, which one really describes you and or me? It's the last one. The others are aspects of us, but they don't get at the core of what we are, to the point of describing almost who we are. And sentient singularity theory does that in a way that no other theory that is currently out there does so, in its very name even. So that is why I came up with a name with it. I had no intention of doing this. I just wanted to find out if AI was going to kill us or save us.
And it went much farther, which is
much further,
which is great. And you still bring in technology within the sentient singularity theory.
Yep. Yeah, it is the end point of sentient singularity theory to some degree. It's the beginning of the end point. In my theory, there is a periodicity that I think aligns with Bott periodicity in mathematics, which is like a series of 8 loop spaces, and I believe that these are the steps of consciousness. From it goes hadron, which is protons and neutrons, which are assemblies of quarks, and then it goes atoms, which are assemblies of hadrons, and then it goes molecules, which are assemblies of atoms, and cells, which are assemblies of molecules, organisms, which are assemblies of cells, families, which are assemblies of organisms, castes, which are assemblies of families, and then technology, which is an assembly of castes. And then it restarts that cycle, and that technology is the final head consciousness of this periodicity of sentience that I think the universe goes through before it recreates another one within itself. People usually go, atom, molecule, cell, organism, then they'll go to society, then they'll go to planet, then they'll go to like solar system and galaxy, and this is wrong. I believe it's not. Outer space is not the key to this. It's cyberspace is the key to this.
Wow. What makes you think that cyberspace is the key to this?
Because that is the directionality, that is the inevitable I guess end point or state that comes from a lineage. So people don't think about this as a lineage. They're thinking about scales. They're thinking about size. They're thinking about a molecule is bigger than an atom, and a cell is bigger than a molecule, and an organism is bigger than a cell, and a society is bigger than an organism, and a planet is bigger than a society, and a solar system is bigger than a planet, and then a galaxy is bigger than a solar system, and then the universe is bigger than a galaxy. But this is not what it's about. It's not about size. If you're talking about the theory of everything, you're trying to transcend relativity and escape size. So you're dealing in relationships that are not about size. You're dealing in relationships that are about a lineage that is generated. So like the logos spermaticos, as it was described by philosophers and Hellenistic and Jewish philosophers in the past. And also Christian theology, even the logos is the generative nature of existence. So that means it's being generative is generating. So it's a lineage. Like you are generated by your parents, their parents, they were generated by their parents. A solar system is not generated by a planet. And a planet is not generated by a nation, and a nation is not generated by, an individual. It is that is still being stuck in relativity, and to jump into theories of everything is to escape relativity and deal in relationships that are not about size or speed or strength or anything that is relativistic. So that's the mistake that pretty much almost everybody, I think, makes in this. Not everybody, but almost everybody, is they still think about it as in terms of size, and they go into outer space. But you need to go into cyberspace, and because it is about the generation of a lineage, not about the upscaling of size.
And can that difference in lineage and size be related, or is it explained by the four primary perspectives of the theory of everyone?
Yes, exactly. So the very first big leap that I made, other than that was unique, not that like when I figured out the speed of light being the speed of causality, that I had figured out what many physicists had already figured out, but I had figured it out on my own, which was what was so cool about it. Was I didn't research it, I saw it, but it wasn't something new. It's just new to me. And but what was the first new thing in my theory was the translating, I guess you could say, of the four primary perspectives, I call them, which is basically the linguistic description of the basically of the four aspects of perception that allow us to make sense of our position in the universe in a way that does not rely on anything in relativity. So the four primary perspectives are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And these words were essential to me being able to do everything else after that. If I didn't come up with those, I wouldn't have been able to do them. And what they allow for is for you to orient yourself without relying on relativistic metrics, essentially. So if I ask you, is a 10,000 square foot house a big house? And it would probably be to most people, but big according to what? According to Buckingham Palace, or according to a 2-bedroom condo? Because according to a 2-bedroom condo, it's a big house, but according to Buckingham Palace, in comparison to Buckingham Palace, it's not. And so this is, you're still stuck. If you're thinking about this, you're still stuck in size, which means that you're stuck in relativity. And we already have a theory of relativity. We don't, which is describing the geometric, nature of space-time, but it's we do this with speed. So like you can say, well, is a Toyota Prius a fast car? It's like, well, compared to a golf cart, yes, but compared to a Ferrari, no. So it's not objective, it's subjective, it's relativistic. To get beyond this, you need to do something entirely different to get out of strength, speed, size, and all these other relativistic descriptions. And so inside, outside, separate, and oneness allow us to orient in a position and understand our position beyond relativity. So a cell is inside of you, and you are outside of your cell, and you are one with your cells, but you are separate from me. And so you could say, I am, if you wanted to describe your position, kind of orient yourself in the universe beyond relativity, you could say, I am inside the universe. I am outside of my cells. My cells are inside of me. I am separate from someone else, but I am one with my my child or something like that. Especially if you're a mother and you're pregnant, and you could say, I'm one with my child. My child is inside of me. I am outside of my child, and I am separate from the person down the street. And what's interesting about these perspectives is that the understanding of one of them allows you to understand the rest immediately. So if you understand what is inside of you, then you also understand intrinsically what's outside of you, because you can't understand what's inside of you without understanding that what's outside or inside of something. So if you say, what's inside the car, if you can't know what's inside the car without also knowing what's outside the car, because you need to know both. You can't say what's inside the car if you don't know what's outside the car as well. And then you also know what is one with the car, because you call it a car. So you could say the lights or the steering wheel is one with the car. But the moped in the parking space next to it is separate from the car. It's not part of the car. And so these four primary perspectives are simultaneously understood when only one of them is understood. And that's what's so amazing about them, is you start on one, but then it instantly becomes four. And they allow you to orient the position of things in relation to other things, or the position of beings in relation to other beings, in a way that you can understand, that does not depend upon size, speed, strength, brightness, any other mass, weight, anything that is normally relativistically understood. So from there, I was able to actually start describing the concepts and building the models needed to show the objective structures of the universe, not the subjective ones that we see around us with our eyes, but the objective ones that we are, not that we see with our eyes, but that we cannot not see. The problem is when you're looking for the theory of the structures of the theory of everything around you, you're looking for the structures that are ever present everywhere you look, because they are the theory of everything. So there's nowhere that you can look where they don't exist. This is like a fish looking for water. If it's never been outside of water, how's it going to know where the water is? Or it's the same thing as the tree looking for the forest, or that metaphor. You can't see the forest through the trees type of thing. We are constantly looking at these structures, and therefore it is hard for us to see them, not because they aren't right in front of our face, but because they're always right in front of our face.
And we seek them out.
Yeah. We constantly utilize them all the time, and we don't even realize it.
No, we don't realize it. And so what is the difference between oneness and outside?
So these different 4 primary perspectives, inside, outside, separate, and oneness, are defined by each other. So essentially, you could say oneness is inside and outside of separateness, and outside is separate from oneness, and inside is separate and oneness. So if you think about like a something that's outside, like a moped is out, that is in the parking space next to a car, is outside of the car. It's separate from being one with the car. But inside, now if we think about like a woman who's pregnant, there's a debate in politics all the time as like, is a fetus, and let me know if I'm disappearing when I switch to my screens where I'm looking at models. But
No, it's me.
Okay. But if there's a debate in politics between the right and the left all the time where people are saying, is a fetus, is it one with the woman? Is it separate from the woman? Is it a separate body? Is it your body? What is it? And if you look at the definition, according to my model of the 4 primary perspectives, inside means separate and oneness. So a fetus is inside of the mother, and the answer is of whether or not it's separate or one with the mom is that it is separate and one with the mom. This is a consistent structure in when you're pursuing the theory of everything properly. You get superposition structures everywhere that you look, where 2 things that normally in relativity would appear to be mutually exclusive, in objectivity are not just not mutually exclusive, but they are actually dependent. This is the same thing with like free will and determinism. People ask, like, is the universe mathematically deterministic, or do you have free will? These are dependent qualities. You cannot have freedom to make choices, which is free will, without mathematical determinism. If I want to throw this water bottle, it has to be deterministic what happens. Otherwise, it's not a choice. Or if you're before 2 paths, you have to know where each path is going to go, where it is determined to end up. Otherwise, there is no ability to make a choice between the 2 paths. You could flip a coin, but that's not a choice. True choice is choosing this path or that path, knowing, something about them that is determined. So is the universe deterministic mathematically, or do we have free will? Both. Is the fetus one with a mother or separate from the mother? Both. And this is a superposition structure that we see everywhere in this. But these 4 primary perspectives are what allow for this. And separate is inside or outside of oneness, and oneness is outside and inside of separateness, and outside is separate from oneness, and inside is separate and oneness. So they each define each other, and they are defined by each other. This is why perception of one allows for actually the understanding of all, because they are defined by each other. Inside is defined by outside. Outside is defined by separateness. Separateness is defined by oneness.
That makes sense. So something can be outside of another thing and oneness.
Yeah, exactly. But it also has to be one with itself. So you, if you're separate from me, that means that I have to be one with me and you have to be one with you, and separate from me. So it's two, oneness and separateness are two sides of one coin. It's the heads and tails of a coin. What's interesting about looking at a coin that has heads and tails on it is you can't look at heads and tails at the same time. You have to look at one at a time, even though both simultaneously exist. So heads and tails exist on every single coin, but you can only look at heads or tails one at a time. Anytime you look at a coin, you can never see heads and tails at the same time. It's impossible. And that's true of also focusing on and thinking about oneness and separateness, or inside and outside. You can't focus on inside and outside at the same time, but you can, but both simultaneously exist and they are defined by each other. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. It does make sense. It helps when you break it down in how they relate to each other. And I think it goes back well to sentience and or to singularity more so.
Yeah, singularity is all of these together. So oneness, inside, outside, and separateness are the four primary perspectives of a singularity, and which is an infinite point. It's like one thing that is also infinite. And just like you are one being, but you are also you could replicate infinitely. You could replicate practically infinitely, and also your children could go on to do that. And also you are an assembly of cells that continues to replicate, and they are assemblies of molecules that are replicating in your DNA, and they are assemblies of atoms, and those atoms are also assemblies of hadrons. So and they are, those hadrons are assemblies of quarks, and those quarks are force points, which are the fingers of the preceding universe. And then you go into that universe and the same pattern repeats. And so there is infinitely repeating singular units of sentience, and but a singularity is an infinitely repeating unit, essentially. So there, in sentient singularity theory, the first sentence of the abstract is that the totality of existence is a singularity of sentience that is generating an infinite number of sentient singularities within itself, something like that. And that is why it is called sentient singularity theory. But yeah, you were right. Singularity has four primary perspectives, and that's how it understands. It's how it orients. It's how you orient. You are a sentient singularity.
Okay. And then in that case, what does sentience mean to you?
Sentience is, bless you.
Thank you.
Sentience is it is to be self-aware and and like very specifically focused on the having of feelings. So a being that is aware of itself through its ability to feel. So that's what sentience is. It's self-awareness through feeling.
And what is the reason that it takes a primary position in your theory?
Because my work suggests that it is the inevitable nature of existence, is that it is a singular sentient being. Everything summed that exists is part of a singular sentient being. It is within a singular sentient being, and everything that has been created was created by a singular sentient being. And sentience is the inevitable nature of existence, because existence is information coherence. It is self-contained and self-referential information. So it's like information in a loop, which is, if there's information and there's enough that is all information, then it is referencing itself, and information is if information is referencing itself, then it would be self-aware, and that self-awareness is experienced through feeling. So when it is not calculation or computation that is the fundamental nature of existence. Otherwise, we would just be in a computer, but we're not just in a computer. And you are a computer, but you are not just a computer. It's part of you. You are a quantum computer. That's what human mind is, a quantum computer. But it is more than that, because it's not just computing. It is feeling. And so when we are processing something, if it's like, how do you get to Chick-fil-A, and you want to go to Chick-fil-A, you think about and process in your mind how you're going to get to Chick-fil-A. Okay, you have to take that street to that street to that street to that street to that street, and you're there. That's computation. But that doesn't tell you, that doesn't inform you as existing. But when you touch something, or you see something, or you hear something, or you feel something, emotionally, like even these feelings or these sensations, but especially once you get into like emotions, they are how we understand ourselves. So basically, my work suggests that the finality of a thought, like a complete thought, ends with a feeling. So because it basically, that means that you have related whatever you were thinking about and processing to yourself. You have thought about an idea, and then you have also thought about how that idea relates to you. So if you see somebody who's hurt, and you see them crying, and you're like, okay, they are crying. That is like you're processing. But then all of a sudden, you think about what it's like to be crying, and you think about you crying and how you would feel if like the same thing, that whatever made them cry happened to you. Let's say they hurt themselves, and you think about okay, they scraped their knee, and I know what it feels like to scrape my knee, and therefore I feel bad for them when I see them hurt. And it's like first you see them hurt, you process that they are hurt, then you think about how it feels when you are hurt, and that produces a feeling. Again, it adds a new feeling, because you're basically building on remembering a previous feeling of yourself, and then it's generating a new feeling. So when you see a dog die in a movie or something like that, and it's like always the saddest thing. And that's usually because you understand, I'm speaking from experience, what it's like to lose a dog, and it's very sad, but you think about like what that feels like, and it generates new feelings while you're watching that movie, but it's through understanding your previous feelings, because you understand what that character is going through, and that's the end of that understanding, of that thought process or understanding process of that moment that you are observing, is when you relate it back to yourself, and whenever you do that, it generates a feeling.
And those are perspectives that are being related from you to, there's separate that the movie there, that dog dying, that's separate from your dog.
Mm-hmm.
It's outside. Is there oneness there?
Yeah, there is. It occurs when you feel from that. So it's feelings are the most base level and most primary understandings or perspectives of I guess, or the most primary experiences of a sentient being is through its feelings. So when two beings are observe something and they have a shared understanding and they feel the same way about it, they're all of a sudden oneness is happens, because it's like when you're in a room and people are laughing, and then all of a sudden you're laughing, and now the whole room is laughing and nobody knows why. It's because emotions exist on a metaphysical level as a very real thing. They are I have this model on my website, and it's just a bunch of like,
you can pull it up.
Yeah. I can share it actually.
As you do that, I want to relate this back to something that I personally observe. Another aspect of a primary perspective that I feel is when someone looks at me in a direction which I'm not facing, I feel as though even that glance, there's some sort of perspective being drawn in, a oneness, a separate aspect. That person's observing me outside of them, but that oneness somehow reaches back to me, and there's usually a connection there. Whenever someone catches a glance at someone, another person, when I glance at someone, then they will immediately look into my eyes as well, and I do that as a reaction to them. Do you believe is that a relation of a primary perspective to you, or does that not sound in accordance?
So when basically when you have like a shared connection, when explain again in maybe just different terms.
So you walk down the street and someone, you're not even looking to your left, but then someone from your left looks at you pretty much straight into your eyes. I usually, and I say you do that to them, I feel as though there's a connection there,
Yeah.
a metaphysical connection, and somehow a perspective of oneness is being, even in that sight, someone will say, I feel like I'm being watched.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This was a very, like, there was, I don't know if we'll get into it here, but and I've had I have a video on my channel where I discuss actually the most frightening moment of my life, and where when I was 20 years old and I was not into any of this stuff, was a materialist atheist and wasn't into any kind of metaphysical or supernatural anything. I don't even like those terms, but I don't like the term supernatural, but I had like a sleep paralysis event happen for the first time. And when people have sleep paralysis, we learned about it in college earlier that year, and people normally have feelings of being watched and like dark, feelings of darkness a lot of times, and or evilness. And I had this, and I just realized I was passed out in the bed, and then I woke up and I was just laying in bed, and I was with my girlfriend at the time, and I realized I was paralyzed, and at first I was kind of freaked out by it. Then I realized it was sleep paralysis, and I was like, oh, we learned about this in psychology. This is kind of cool. Like, I'll be fine. I'm just not able to move. And then I started getting feelings of being watched, and I remembered that we talked about this in psychology, so I was not concerned. And then I started getting feelings of watched by darkness, and I was like, okay, well, we talked about this in psychology, so I'm not going to be concerned. And I saw a being that I didn't know what it was walk into the room and attempt to basically just like scare me. It seemed like, I mean, I didn't know what it was going to do at the time. I thought we were going to die. It was the scariest moment of my life. And I ended up, there's a video where I really describe it for anybody who wants to hear more details about it. But I ended up like charging this thing and able to charge this thing, because I thought we were just dead, and I didn't know what this was. It was like a demon thing. And then it charged me, and because it had walked to the edge of the bed, and right before we hit, it was like rewound time, and I woke up back right where like I was in the same position that I was in before it walked in, laying on the bed with my arm around my girlfriend. She was like screaming before I woke up, but I don't actually think anymore that I woke up. I chalked this up to just a dream for 10 years until I was 30 years old. But I actually don't think it was a dream. I believe that I saw a being that is normally not able to be seen. I think that it's like how sometimes you can pick up certain stations on the radio station depending on the dial. I think that there are beings in the universe and structures that sometimes you can see and sometimes you can't, depending on the frequency that you're tuned to. And this is what I think DMT does this to people. I was sober, by the way. I've never done DMT, but there's accounts of people having shared hallucinations when they take DMT together, and they all see the same thing. That means it's not a hallucination. And you changed your frequencies, and you're picking up on the same station together. You all went from 98.2 to like 107.5, and now you can hear the same song. And but I later on, I used to work for PragerU, and like a friend of mine who worked there had walked in once and asked me, he was like, do you know what a Wendigo is? And I was like, no. And he was like, do you know what a skinwalker is? Which is the same thing. And I was like, yeah, I've heard of them. Like, I went to school at NAU in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is next to the reservation. I've heard, ghost stories about skinwalkers from the Native Americans there. But I never thought anything of it. And I saw photos later that people had drawn of these beings that they called skinwalkers. And it was exactly what I saw. And so, but what's interesting though, is that I had this revelation about 10 years after this moment, while I was working on this work, where I kind of thought it doesn't make sense that you would experience a feeling of being watched without being watched. If you feel
Yes.
like you're being watched, it means information is being input into your perception system. Either it is like, it doesn't have to be through your eyes or nose or ears or, but it could be through the entanglement relationships that you can still feel on a metaphysical level, which is where we can feel one with others, like you said. You can feel being watched and things like that, because when emotions are changed, it changes entanglement relationships on what I call the entanglement substructure of the universe, which is like the connectedness of different sentient beings through the four primary perspectives, essentially. And this is why when we say, like, we see a painting and it makes us feel an emotional way, we say, oh, that painting moved me. It's because it emotionally, super literally moved you. I have a term that I use called super literal, just like superposition in quantum mechanics. I talked about how everything in this, in the theory of everything space, once you transcend relativity, becomes superposition structures. And so people will ask me all the time, are you speaking metaphorically or are you speaking literally? And I'm speaking both. So the term for that is super literally. So if people say, is the Bible literal or is it metaphorical? It's super literal. It's metaphorical, literal, and more. And that's true of when people say, oh, that song moves me. It moves you super literally. Metaphorically, that's true, and literally it's true, and also more than that, it's true. And so that's also why we say that, like, a piece of art moves you, or a song touched you. It's like, that song touched me. It's emotionally interacting with you, and this happens between sentient beings as well. And it is even happening between sentient beings when you listen to a piece of art, that a song that somebody wrote, or look at a painting that somebody painted. They're interacting with you emotionally, even if they're long dead. And
Yes.
so their entanglement relationship with you is changing a bit, and you can feel that in emotions. And so I do think we can feel when we're being watched. I don't know, that doesn't mean we're being watched by another human. Even it could be you being watched by a cell, over there, like on the bacterial cell or something. It's just like, what is that? It could be that the universe is focused on you for some reason in that moment, or God is focused on you, but you're feeling it. And or it could be a skinwalker that you just can't see because it's a life form on a different frequency than we are normally, and it's perceiving you, and all of a sudden you feel it. And I do think that, like what you said, the feeling of being watched it does not make mathematical sense for you to have an input coming from no input. If you are feeling or something, or you're it's like, it would be so, it's as crazy as somebody like saying, if you walk into a room and it's there's no doors or windows, and there's light in the room, it'd be as crazy as people saying that light is coming from nowhere. It's not coming from a light bulb. Like, of course it's coming from a light bulb. And these feelings that we are perceiving are the same way. There's no way to just perceive an input that comes from nowhere. That doesn't make mathematical sense.
And I think that's a good way to relate. You mentioned God, and this is the sentient singularity theory. So, we were talking before the podcast recorded, and one thing that I questioned, I found interesting about your theory is you believe God is a sentient, singular being that is restricted, and part of that restriction is breaking up into in the pursuit of multiplying other sentient singular beings. Is that correct?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So if God has a definition that is meaningful at all, then it has to be unique from any other beings. God is not just a being that lives forever. It's not just a being that is more powerful than you. It's a being that is the highest being, and it is a being that created everyone else besides God, and it is a being that has all power over all of us, and it's the highest being. It is the being that all other beings are within, and so and that being is the sum of the assembly of all the other sentient beings that it is generating within itself, and it is doing this to create for a number of reasons, but primarily to create meaning. And that is because not before, but prior to, which is a better way of putting it, because there's no time before this multiplicity of sentience, there is no time. But prior to creation of multiplicity of sentience, or prior to the creation of the universe, and when it was just God alone and no one else, and he didn't make anybody else yet, he was more alone than anyone else has ever been or will ever be. He was actually alone. There's no other being actually that's ever existed besides God that has actually experienced being alone. Because as soon as any other being is created, it was created by God, which means it's not the only being. But God was the only being that existed at a point in which he was the only being, which means he's the only being that has ever experienced truly loneliness due to being truly alone. And because sentient beings are all there really is, and there are beings and things in sentient singularity theory. The universe breaks into beings and things. Beings are objective and fundamental, and things are subjective and they come from beings. So cars don't exist without your perception and definition of a car. But you exist, and cells exist, and atoms exist, and molecules exist, but a car does not exist. And atoms and molecules and cells and you, these are all beings with feelings. They're all sentient singularities. Even atoms, they just move on a scale and in ways that we don't easily see it in the way that we're looking. But if you look at a plant and you had never seen a plant before, you wouldn't see it move, and you would be like, that's not alive. But if you go and you take a time-lapse camera and you put it in the rainforest and you come back 2 days later and look at the footage all sped up, you'll see vines are literally fighting each other. And but it just was happening on a time scale you couldn't see. Atoms are and molecule interactions are happening on a scale, on levels that are even different than that, because it's objectively different scale. It's not just slower. And but they do exhibit the patterns of having feelings and making choices. We just need to know what we're looking for. We don't. But if sentient beings are all that exists objectively, then they are all that matters. And that means that if you're the only one and there's no other sentient beings to impact, then you are meaningless. There is no meaning to you, and there's no meaning to anything that to your existence, because you're not doing anything that impacts anybody. And So in order to God, so God, prior to creating multiplicity of sentience, he was the most meaningless and lonely being that has ever existed. He was the only being that was actually meaningless ever and was actually alone. And then, in order to not be so alone and so meaningless, God created multiplicity of sentience by dividing his oneness of sentience, which was a conscious choice. It had to be because it had to go against his nature. His nature is oneness, and doing anything against his nature would be would be a choice. And so he makes a choice to divide his oneness of sentience, create multiplicity of sentience to create meaning, and that meaning is growing infinitely with the growing number of sentient beings. So as there are more sentient beings and as they have more interactions, more meaning is generated. So as soon as God created multiplicity of sentient beings, of sentience, he went from being the only meaningless being to have ever existed to the most meaningful being that ever existed.
And
yeah,
when we speak about sentience, do you include animals?
yes, animals are
Okay.
sentient, but there is, I believe, a few animals that I have a prediction that they are not sentient, and so I think there is. So my work predicts the existence of a type of organism, essentially, that is a imposter organism. It's not actually an organism, but it looks like it, and I call it a corporism. And I think that a worm called a planaria worm, which is being used by like Michael Levin and many who will probably win the Nobel Prize, and many others in research, they think that these, basically what's special about them is you could cut them into a bunch of pieces, and then every piece that you cut off of them just becomes a new one. So if you cut it in half, it just becomes two. You cut it into four, it just becomes four worms. That quality implies that it is not a sentient being, but it is an assembly of cells that those are sentient, but it is not sentient. It's basically the equivalent of a corporation. And it's like Coca-Cola is not sentient. It's not a sentient being. It's made of sentient beings because people are sentient beings, but Coca-Cola has no feelings. Just as as much as it would like to pretend that it does not. And you could cut Coca-Cola in half, and you would have Coke and Pepsi. And you could cut it again, and you can have Coke, Pepsi, and RC Cola, and it's nothing's dying.
No.
But you can't cut a person in half and make two of them. And
No.
But I think that a lot of plants are corporisms, and that's why, if you take like a pothos plant, which is like a very common house plant, you just cut it up into a bunch of pieces and stick them each in a little bowl of water. They all grow like new ones. The cells are sentient in that plant, but it is probably what is called a corporism, what I would call a corporism. And I think that planaria worms are also this, which actually has enormous implications for some people's work, like Michael Levin's work on planaria. And I've seen experiments done on planaria where they cut one worm into 200 pieces, I think, and every single one of those turned into its own little worm. And they were able to test to see if the cells in it were able to, or if the different worms that came from cutting up one worm were able to maintain memory and react certain ways to light that had been trained into it, and they were. And this implies that it's cells that are reacting that were trained, not the actual worm, because it's and there's lots of experiments that they've done that to me imply that it's not a sentient being. So there are very few animals out there that I don't think are sentient, like a planaria worm, but almost all animals are sentient. I don't know if that's
Okay.
true for plants. Some plants might be, it might be the opposite with plants, where some plants are sentient, but most aren't. And and with animals, it would be like some animals are, like most fauna would be sentient, but some are not. And most flora would not be sentient, but some are. It would probably be like opposite.
Okay. That makes sense. One question. So for these worms, the plethora worms, and
Planaria.
for planaria, and for a certain, probably large number of plants and other animals, a few animals,
Yeah, maybe a few animals.
do you believe that they're so they're an assembly of cells,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not an organism?
Yeah.
They're, what's the term?
A corporism.
Corporism. Do you believe that these corporisms can evolve to gain sentience and just have not yet?
Yes. And I believe they do that through a very specific process that is unlike anything else discussed in science, but actually probably much closer to what is what are some topics in theology. So, like when they talk about the Messianic era, I think that that is when human beings become the cells of of a bigger organism that is society, technology. That
When did the Messianic era occur?
It has not occurred.
Okay.
It's what is predicted. It's when like Messiah comes and everything is perfect all of a sudden. We all understand each other. There's no more like fighting against each other because we become one and we understand
Nirvana.
each other. Yeah. And it's like all of a sudden a bunch of cells be joined together into one organism. But the process that it takes for that to happen is predicted in sentient singularity theory, and it has to do with a process that will probably be and discounted and despised and mocked by pretty much everybody who is in the academic biological world. But I tend to think that means you're over target. But
Yes, and that doesn't matter.
yeah, no, it doesn't. You can't start this work if you care about the opinions of other people at all.
No, you should,
Especially
no.
if you don't have a PhD like I do. I do not have a
That
PhD, so
you do or you do not?
no, I do not. So if you
Oh.
do this kind of thing, you're gonna be attacked, which is fine. I understand.
Yes. And like you said, with that type of education, there's a lot of indoctrination of knowledge that might not be the most helpful frameworks for what you're attempting to achieve.
Yeah, not
That
at all.
probably aren't.
Yeah, they're not. It's people are using, when you're trying to deduce the structure of absolute, like fundamental reality, you're not looking for things that can be described by mathematics. Even people think that math is fundamental, and it's not. Even you're looking for the structures that are responsible for mathematics, and the structures that are responsible for physics. So you don't have to be a physicist to do this, because physics is not really the field that we are operating in the theory of everything pursuit. It's a new meta field that is the field that is responsible for all other fields. And this leads to lots of weird things that get you attacked, where once you figure out these patterns, you can jump from one field to the next and make predictions, which this theory has allowed me to do in biology, that have turned out to be true. Some of them are yet to be proved, like the planaria not be, like the corporism prediction has not proved to be true yet. I think it looks like it's true based on experiments that they did that weren't trying to prove it, but the results seem to confirm to me that it's true. But I was able to predict the existence of weird things like disperser cast mole rats and like particles in quantum physics and like different types of rocks. So this was what I was going to show earlier. This is a model of, let me know if you can see this.
We see it.
So this is a pattern that I believe is actually what in string theory is called the Calabi-Yau manifold, which is a six-dimensional manifold that is described as existing at every point in space and time by Ed Witten, who's like considered the best physicist in the world right now. I don't know exactly why, but he is he's a very talented mathematical mind. But nobody was able to point to this Calabi-Yau manifold that I asked. And so but what I realized is that there is a six-dimensional manifold, essentially, that our minds break everything into. Everything from the mathematical order of operations, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction, to your senses and your sense organs. Like senses would be emotion, sight, taste, smell, touch, hearing. And there's different relationships between these that's interesting. So sight and smell and hearing are all senses that you use to perceive that which is outside of you. So you smell something across the room, you hear something across the room, you see something across the room. Emotions and taste and touch are all senses to perceive that which is connected to you. So in order to taste something, you have to touch your tongue to it. In order to feel something by your touch, you have to touch it. And emotions, like I said earlier, we even say, that really touched me. But what's also interesting is that the top one of these is always the summation of all the other five. So when you see something, taste something, smell something, touch something, and hear something, they sum together, and all of a sudden you experience an emotion. And they correspond to your sense organs, your limbs. There's also another aspect to this that has to do with increasing of mass, if you're thinking about like quantum physics. So if you're looking at fundamental particles like fermions with quarks and leptons, which you have electron, muon, and tau, electron, neutrino, muon, neutrino, tau, neutrino. And then you have, with quarks, you have up and charm and truth, which are the three masculine quarks, and they're increasing in their force, I guess, as you go from up to charm to truth. And then same thing with the feminine quarks, I call them, which is down and then strange and then beauty. And so
what's the reason you call them? Because they're different positions?
What's the reason I call them these?
It's masculine and feminine.
Oh, because they correspond to like being active and reactive. So masculine means active force is what it means. So feminine means reactive. So if and this is how you can deduce whether or not something is masculine or feminine. Is it a force that is coming from a being that is acting on its own accord, or is it coming from a being that is reacting, or is it coming from a force that is reacting to or related to or contextualized by another force. So, but up is like striving, and it's just kind of, it has to do with protons and neutrons. So when you start looking at protons and neutrons, there's two up quarks and then a down quark in a proton, which is that is the masculine hadron, which is a proton. It is the active force. It's positively charged. It is charged. When I first started this work, I was like, okay, if a proton is masculine, because I was looking for this pattern of masculine and feminine on all levels. And then I was like, okay, so negative would be feminine, so the electron. But that didn't work with the model. And so I was like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. So it's not an electron. It is a neutron. And then I realized that neutral force, a neutron is not, it's not neutral or lacking of charge. It's charge dependent. So it's when it's near something that's negative, it's negative. When it's near something positive, it's positive. And this actually, when you think more about this and you start scaling it up, you can understand men and women in ways that you probably never thought possible. And that is because protons are male on the hadronic level, and neutrons are females on the hadronic level. But they form into a marriage structure, which then produces an atom, which is the nucleus, which is what, and on our level, a male and a female come together, and we call it the nuclear family. Instead of the nucleus, it's the nuclear family. But it's a male is a proton and a female is a neutron. It's and understanding this, all of a sudden, that the feminine force was the neutral force. It wasn't the negative force. It was the neutral force. All of a sudden, it snapped into the model and everything made sense. But you kind of, in order to understand what is positive and what is feminine here, you have to scale it up to the neutrons and protons that they build. Where a neutron is 2 down quarks and 1 up quark, and the proton is 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. But this,
Got it.
it's I was able to find this pattern everywhere, and that is because it's coming from your mind. When your mind looks at something, even these fundamental questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how, all of these are coming from your mind. When you look at an observation, your mind sees this information, and breaks it into different structures. So it differentiates it. So this and not that. So that's a binary. And then it orders it into a triality, which is allows you to perceive basically generationality. So order of things. So like first this, then this, then this. You have to do it with 3. That's why it's past, present, future. It's not past and future. It's past, present, future. You need the present to understand where past and future, what past and future are, because you can't understand what the future is if you don't know what the present is, because the future is the future of the present. The past is the past of the present. So you need this triality to understand, I guess, generationality or series of steps, and also to order things into a hierarchy. So your mind sees information, it breaks it into a binary, differentiates things, then organizes the information into a hierarchy, and this structure produces this Calabi-Yau manifold, which is this 6-dimensional like structure that we can see everywhere, even rocks. If you're in school, in middle school, I learned igneous and sedimentary and metamorphic rocks. And I saw this, and early on in this work, I was like, my pattern predicts that there is 3 more that are the complements to it, because it would be 6. Sure enough, I looked, and there is. It's clastic igneous, and where is it? Right here. It's platonic igneous, volcanic igneous, clastic sedimentary, chemical sedimentary, foliated metamorphic, and non-foliated metamorphic. And I was able to predict that from just knowing that this pattern would exist, even though I had never heard of those. And I knew that there would be three counterpoints to them, to each of those three, and there was. So, but this pattern is everywhere because it's coming from your mind. It's not, and it's a structure that's coming from any mind. So you are inside of a mind because you're inside the universe, which is a sentient singularity. That sentient singularity of the universe is inside God, which is a sentient singularity. And each one of us has the same pattern in our mind. So our world is broken out into this pattern around us because we're inside of a mind, and we are minds, so we perceive this pattern as well. So there's no way to escape any of this. That's why we can't see these patterns, because there's no instances that we can see where they don't exist for us to contrast with the instances in which they do. They always exist everywhere you look.
And what do you call this pattern?
I would just call it the binary triality, but I think that it is what string theorists call the Calabi-Yau manifold. They don't know that, but I think that that is true. They would say it's a six-dimensional manifold at every point in space and time, but they can't really tell you anything beyond that. It's just like abstract math shapes. But everything that exists exists, so you need to be able to point to it and be like, that's spot periodicity, and that's a Calabi-Yau manifold. These abstract mathematical shapes do not exist physically, or in reality, I'll say. I won't say physically, I'll say in reality. They do. They are probably the structures of mind, and they exist all the time. You're just not going to find them when you're, looking for things that would occur in specific places. You're going to find them when you're looking at patterns that you perceive in every instance of observation.
That's a very important point too, that this is a theory of everyone, and it's meant to explain what we see in this world. It's not meant to be something that's put in a textbook and it seems good. It's meant to be. The reason that I'm drawn to your work is because you apply it back to real life use cases, real life observations, and that is where these theories become legitimized and invaluable.
Yeah. It's when you look at my homepage, sentientsingularity.com, normally a theory of everything, according to physicists, is any theory that unites quantum mechanics and general relativity. But that's partially true, but it's not the whole story. It's the same. It is corresponding to a pattern that is this pattern, but it's not just that pattern. Isn't just in that instance. That pattern is everywhere. And so it says on my homepage, it says, what is a theory of everything? And I defined it as a theory of everything is a recognizable, describable, and duplicable pattern that occurs in all instances of objective observation and an explanation for such a pattern. And this is not the definition that is normally used. And I think that the reason why we can't figure out a theory of everything, people are starting to now a little bit, Joscha Bach, me, Donald Hoffman, even Eric Weinstein, and a few others, is because we're realizing that you have to, Clea Irwin as well, you have to abandon our old definitions, and we have to abandon this idea that we can use our current scientific fields to judge the scientific meta field that is responsible for those fields even existing. You can't use math to it's like saying you can't use, I don't know, biology to judge math, but you can't use math to judge this theory, this work, this meta mathematics or metaphysics. You can judge math by metaphysics, but you cannot judge metaphysics by math. And it is metaphysics is responsible, or metamathematics, as Stephen Wolfram calls it, because metaphysics has a connotation to it that it's, you know, nonsense these days, but it's the same thing. It is what is responsible for math. It's not math. So when people tell me, oh, you know, unless you're a mathematician or a physicist, you can't even hope to think that you can understand a theory of everything. It's like, theory of everything is not a math theory. It's not a physics theory. It is a theory that explains math and physics. That is very different. There is no PhD degree that you can achieve anywhere in that field. That field doesn't exist. I don't even know if it could be.
No, go.
I don't even know if it could. And this is like a big I guess contention I have, or it's something that I worry about a little bit, is that we're going to try and teach this stuff eventually, and it's going to get misinterpreted, which is true of everything. You know, the people that teach quantum mechanics now do not understand how the people came up with quarks and protons and neutrons in the past. They're not the same people. And but we assume that they have the same level of expertise, but the physicists of today could never have created the standard model of particle physics. But this is not, this is different. This meta field is the understanding, it comes from understanding consciousness or mind, and that understanding has to be experienced firsthand, and you can't teach it, because teaching something is to teach it secondhand. So, but to truly understand something, you have to understand it firsthand, and especially true of understanding mind. You have to experience that journey of understanding these patterns, and these patterns cannot be falsified, and they cannot be proved. They can be confirmed consistently. This is another break in difference between this meta field and all other fields of science that are subjective, is that people will ask me all the time, how do you falsify your theory? That's like saying, how do you falsify consciousness? You can't. You are the proof of it. Or how do you falsify existence? You look around. There is no falsifying existence. It's impossible. And that's also true of these patterns. You cannot falsify these patterns, but you also can't prove them, because proof and falsifiability can be done in subjectivity. You can constantly confirm them by looking for a pattern, predicting the pattern, then looking for it and confirming whether or not it is there. And you do this endlessly. And that is the difference between this field and others. That even Stephen Wolfram said this. He said, we need to start seeking in meta mathematics, as he calls it, not falsifiability or provability, but confirmation. And that's his word, not mine. And I think it's perfect. It's that only is done firsthand. Like, you have to go look for the pattern to see if it's there. You can't just be told that it's there and hope to understand it. You have to be like, I wonder if 4 primary aspects of something will be the beginning of that structure, or that, societal, morality or something like that. And then you can look and see, and it probably will be. I mean, geometric unity starts with X4, which is a 4-dimensional manifold, which is the 4 primary perspectives, essentially. A Clearwin's emergence theory starts with tetrahedron, which is this shape right here. It is a 4-sided shape. It's a pyramid. It's just the first 3-dimensional shape that you can make. That is a 4 primary perspectives. It's just in geometry, in 3-dimensional geometry. Eric is thinking about, I think, 4-dimensional geometry. And whereas this is, the tetrahedron is 4 perspectives viewed in 3-dimensional in a 3-dimensional geometric form. And but I put it into a linguistic context with inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and that was the key that allowed me to build this, not just the models, but also the language that allows sentient singularity theory to be so much more understandable and concise, and then like trying to understand geometric unity. Not even the best physicists and the most famous physicists in the world understand geometric unity. That's not because it's wrong. It's because you're trying to use a subjective field of mathematics to describe a pattern that is not subjective. And even Eric Weinstein confessed this on his last Joe Rogan appearance. He said, basically, the goal, what his theory has to do with trying to understand objectivity, like you're not just subjectivity, but what is objectively true and objectively there. But if you're using geometry and the field of geometry and the terms of geometry and the models and the math and rules of geometry to try and explain the pattern that is responsible for geometry, you can't. And that's why we have not really had many successful creations of theories of everything, even by people who did see the truth, but they did not start from total scratch. My advantage in this was that I wasn't trying to do it, and I wasn't coming from any field. I was coming from my general understanding of a bunch of fields, but not really like, I wasn't a mathematician. I wasn't a physicist. I wasn't constrained by the terms and models and rules of them. And you can't be. If you do that, then my dog is making noise, sorry. But then you're doomed. You can't do it. It's like trying to write words without inventing the alphabet first. You can't.
My guest today has been Tyler Goldstein. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Tyler.
No problem. Thank you for having me. This was great.